Dr. Benjamin Ben Hartwell stood in the doorway of his son's bedroom, watching 7-year-old Tommy sleep peacefully under his dinosaur-themed comforter. The soft glow from the nightlight cast gentle shadows across the boy's face, and Ben couldn't help but smile at the innocence before him. At 38, Ben had built what most would consider a perfect life. A thriving medical practice specializing in pediatric surgery, a beautiful home in the prestigious Willowbrook neighborhood, and what appeared to be an ideal family. His wife of 12 years, Victoria Torrey Hartwell, had been the golden girl of their college, blonde, vivacious, and possessed of a charm that could light up any room. She came from old money, the kind of family where trust funds and country club memberships were birthrights rather than aspirations. Her father, Richard Petton, owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast, and her mother, Constance, was a fixture in high society charity circles. Ben's own background couldn't have been more different. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse to put him through medical school, he understood the value of hard work and loyalty. His mother, Eleanor, had sacrificed everything for his education, never remarrying despite several opportunities, always saying that Ben was her priority. She'd passed away just 2 years after Tommy was born, but not before seeing her son become one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the state. The irony wasn't lost on Ben that he'd spent his career saving children's lives while his own marriage slowly deteriorated behind closed doors. Torrey had embraced the role of a doctor's wife with enthusiasm at first, enjoying the social status and the comfortable lifestyle his success provided. She had thrown herself into charity work, particularly with the Children's Hospital Foundation, where she organized galas and fundraising events that raised millions. But somewhere along the way, the shine had worn off. Ben noticed it first in small things, how she had grown distant during their most personal moments, how she had started taking longer girls' trips with friends, how she had become increasingly critical of his long hours at the hospital. When he tried to discuss it, she would deflect with her signature laugh and change the subject, always managing to make him feel like he was imagining things. Tommy stirred in his sleep, and Ben gently adjusted the blanket around his son's small frame. The boy was the light of his life, brilliant, curious, and blessed with Ben's analytical mind, but Torrey's natural charisma. At 7, he could already read at a high school level and had an uncanny ability to understand complex concepts that amazed his teachers. Ben often lay awake late into the night, trying to pinpoint the exact moment his marriage had begun unraveling. It felt impossible to reconcile the devoted woman he married with the increasingly distant partner who now shared his home. Torrey's social calendar seemed to be at odds with his demanding schedule, and the more he tried to bridge the gap between them, the wider it seemed to grow. Ben's phone buzzed softly. A text from Torrey. Running late at the charity planning committee. Don't wait up. XOXO. He glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The committee meetings usually ended by 9. Ben had stopped questioning these late nights months ago, telling himself he was being paranoid. After all, Torrey's dedication to charity work was genuine. She'd helped raise over $2 million for the Children's Hospital in the past 3 years alone. Walking downstairs to his home office, Ben settled into his leather chair and opened his laptop. He had surgery scheduled for 6 a.m., a complex procedure on a 4-year-old with a rare heart defect. These cases required absolute focus, and Ben prided himself on never letting personal matters interfere with his professional responsibilities. As he reviewed the patient files, his mind wandered to the changes in his household. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, had started giving him sympathetic looks lately, and their gardener had made several comments about Mrs. Hartwell's friend, who'd been visiting during the day when Ben was at work. But Ben had dismissed these observations, choosing to focus on his practice and his son, rather than pursue suspicions that might shatter the life they'd built. The house felt different when Torrey wasn't there, quieter, but somehow more peaceful. Ben found himself appreciating these solitary moments more and more, time when he could simply exist without the constant undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow his wife lately. His phone rang, displaying the hospital's number. Dr. Hartwell speaking. Doctor, I'm sorry to call so late, but we have an emergency. A 6-year-old came in with internal bleeding from a car accident. The family specifically requested you. Ben closed his laptop without hesitation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, he paused to check on Tommy one more time. The boy slept on, unaware that his father was about to save another child's life. While his own family slowly crumbled around him, Ben had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything he believed about his life would be shattered, and the man he thought he was would be replaced by someone far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. 3 weeks later, Ben was leaving the hospital after a particularly challenging surgery when he spotted a familiar figure in the parking garage. Tori stood near a silver Porsche, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with a man Ben didn't recognize. The stranger was tall, athletic, with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to work for anything in his life. Ben instinctively stepped behind a concrete pillar, something primal in his gut warning him to observe rather than approach. The man's hand lingered on Tori's lower back as they talked, a gesture too intimate for mere friendship. When Tori laughed, that same musical laugh that had first attracted Ben in college, and leaned into the stranger's touch, Ben felt something cold settle in his chest. He watched as they kissed, not the quick peck of friends, but the lingering, passionate embrace of lovers. The kiss lasted nearly 30 seconds, and when they broke apart, Tori's face held an expression Ben hadn't seen in years, pure, unguarded happiness. Ben remained hidden until they drove away in separate cars, his medical training automatically cataloging details. The man's license plate, his approximate height and build, the expensive watch on his wrist, the way he moved with the entitled swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences. That evening, Tori came home with shopping bags from high-end boutiques, humming softly as she prepared dinner. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, kissing Ben's cheek with lips that had kissed another man just hours before. "Long surgery? Successful, though." Ben watched her face carefully, searching for any sign of guilt or deception. He found none, only the same practiced smile she'd been giving him for months. "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of what you do." She moved around the kitchen with unusual energy, practically glowing. "Oh, I picked up that wine you like. I thought we could have a nice dinner together for once." It took Ben 3 days of careful investigation to identify the man. Dr. Ryan Hutchfield, age 36, a plastic surgeon with a practice in the city's most exclusive district. His clientele included celebrities, politicians' wives, and anyone with enough money to afford his services. Unlike Ben, who had earned his position through merit and sacrifice, Ryan came from a medical dynasty. His father and grandfather had both been renowned surgeons, and Ryan had inherited not just their practice but their considerable wealth. Ben discovered that Ryan specialized in what he called discretionary procedures, cosmetic surgeries that weren't medically necessary but fed the vanity of wealthy clients. His social media showed a lifestyle of luxury cars, exotic vacations, and charity galas where he posed with the same social elite that Tori moved among. The deeper Ben dug, the more he understood the attraction. Where Ben offered stability and genuine love, Ryan offered excitement and unlimited indulgence. He owned a yacht, a vacation home in the Hamptons, and moved in circles where money was never a consideration. Ben hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Lisa Garrett, who specialized in discreet surveillance. Her report, delivered a week later, contained photographs and documented evidence of a year-long affair, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even vacation trips that coincided with Tori's girls' weekends. "They're not being particularly careful," Lisa noted during their meeting at a coffee shop across town. "It's like they think they're untouchable." Ben studied the photographs with the same clinical detachment he brought to medical charts. Tori and Ryan at expensive restaurants, walking hand in hand through Central Park, embracing on the balcony of a hotel room. In every image, Tori looked radiant, more alive than she'd appeared in years of their marriage. "There's more," Lisa continued, sliding another folder across the table. "Ryan's got a reputation. This isn't his first affair with a married woman. In fact, he seems to prefer them. There are at least 3 other cases I could document in the past 5 years. Ben absorbed this information without visible reaction, though inside something fundamental was shifting. The man who had dedicated his life to healing, who had taken an oath to first do no harm, felt that oath cracking under the weight of betrayal. "What would you like me to do with this information?" Lisa asked. Ben closed the folders and looked out the window, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, unaware that one man's world had just been methodically destroyed. "Continue surveillance. I want to know everything. Their patterns, their meeting places, their plans, everything." That night, Ben sat in his study long after Tori had gone to bed, staring at the photos spread across his desk. Tommy's school pictures sat beside them, a reminder of what was truly at stake. His son deserved better than a mother who could lie so effortlessly, and a father who might have been too trusting to protect him. Ben had always prided himself on being a man of science, someone who approached problems logically and methodically. As he began making notes in a leather journal, documenting dates, patterns, and observations, he realized he was approaching this situation the same way he approached a complex surgery. First, you assess the full extent of the damage. Then you plan your procedure with precision. Finally, you execute with steady hands and absolute conviction. The only difference was that this time Ben wasn't planning to save a life. 2 months after discovering Tori's affair, Ben had developed a routine of careful observation and meticulous documentation. He'd learned that Wednesday evenings were reserved for Ryan, disguised as book club meetings. Saturday afternoons were for shopping trips that ended at Ryan's penthouse apartment. Sunday brunches with the girls were actually extended rendezvous at expensive hotels outside the city. Tommy remained blissfully unaware of the tension, though Ben noticed his son had started asking why Mommy was always going out. Ben deflected these questions with the same skill Tori used to deflect his own concerns, but each innocent inquiry from his 7-year-old son added another layer to Ben's growing resolve. On this particular Friday evening, Ben was reviewing surgical notes when he heard Tommy crying upstairs. He found his son curled in bed, his small body trembling with fever. "Daddy, I don't feel good," Tommy whispered, his voice weak and raspy. Ben immediately shifted into physician mode, checking Tommy's temperature with a digital thermometer. The reading made his blood run cold. 104.2 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't just a childhood fever. This was dangerous territory that required immediate medical attention. "Where's Mommy?" Tommy asked, as Ben gathered him in his arms. "She's at Mrs. Patterson's party, remember?" Ben said, though he knew exactly where Tori really was. Lisa's latest report had confirmed that Friday nights were now part of the affair schedule, with Tori and Ryan meeting at an upscale wine bar downtown. Ben called Tori's cell phone while simultaneously assessing Tommy's condition. The fever was accompanied by a rash on his torso and neck stiffness, symptoms that could indicate anything from a severe infection to something as serious as meningitis. "Ben, what's wrong?" Tori's voice carried the background noise of laughter and clinking glasses. "Tommy has a fever of 104. I need to get him to the hospital now. Can you meet us there?" There was a pause, then Tori's laugh, but not the one meant for him. "He's manipulating us for attention," she said, clearly addressing someone else. "Let him sweat it out." Ben's hand tightened on the phone. "Tori, this is serious. He needs—" "Oh, please, Ben, you're always so dramatic about every little sniffle. It's probably just a cold. Give him some children's Tylenol and he'll be fine in the morning. His temperature is 104. That's not a cold. You're overreacting because you're a doctor. Not every fever is a medical emergency. I'm not leaving Rachel's party because Tommy wants attention." The line went dead. Ben stared at the phone for a moment, processing what had just happened. His wife, Tommy's mother, had just dismissed their son's serious medical condition so she could continue her evening with her companion. The woman he'd married, who'd once cried over a sick kitten, had just callously disregarded their child's welfare. Tommy's breathing had become more labored and his skin felt like fire against Ben's hands. Without another moment's hesitation, Ben wrapped his son in a blanket and called 911. "This is Dr. Benjamin Hartwell. I need an ambulance at 1247 Willowbrook Drive. My 7-year-old son has a high fever with neurological symptoms. I'll meet the paramedics at the door." As he waited for the ambulance, Ben held Tommy close, feeling the boy's rapid heartbeat against his chest. "It's going to be okay, buddy. Daddy's going to take care of you." Tommy looked up with glassy, fever-bright eyes. "Is Mommy coming?" "No, son. Mommy's busy." The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, and Ben rode with Tommy to the hospital, holding his son's small hand as the paramedics worked to stabilize his vitals. The emergency room staff immediately recognized Ben and expedited Tommy's treatment. Dr. Sarah Kim, the attending pediatrician, confirmed Ben's worst fears after running blood tests and a lumbar puncture. "It's bacterial meningitis. We caught it early, but he'll need aggressive antibiotic treatment and monitoring for the next 48 hours. As Tommy was admitted to the pediatric ICU, Ben sat beside his son's bed, watching the monitors track every heartbeat and breath. His phone buzzed with a text from Tori. "How's Tommy? Can't talk right now, but we'll check in later. XOXO. Ben turned off his phone and opened his laptop, accessing the secure email system he used for medical consultations. But instead of patient correspondence, he composed a different kind of message. "Lisa, I need you to accelerate the timeline. Have the custody papers prepared immediately. I want them served Monday morning." He paused, looking at his sleeping son, then continued typing. "Also begin comprehensive background checks on Ryan Hutchfield. Financial records, professional history, personal relationships. I want to know everything about him, especially anything he wouldn't want made public." Ben sent the email and closed the laptop. As he settled back into the bedside chair for what would be a long night of monitoring Tommy's condition, he felt something crystallize inside him. The man who had spent years giving Tori the benefit of the doubt, who had explained away suspicious behavior and ignored obvious red flags, was gone. In his place sat someone much more dangerous, a father whose child had been abandoned in a moment of crisis, a husband whose trust had been shattered beyond repair, and a man who possessed both the intelligence and resources to ensure that betrayal came with consequences. Tommy stirred in his sleep, and Ben gently squeezed his son's hand. "Don't worry, buddy," he whispered. "Daddy's going to make sure you're protected from now on, no matter what it takes." Tommy's recovery took 5 days in the hospital, during which Tori visited exactly twice. Both times she stayed less than an hour and came armed with perfectly reasonable excuses about charity obligations and family commitments. She brought flowers and a stuffed animal, posed for a selfie with Tommy that she immediately posted to social media with the caption, "My brave little warrior," and spent most of her visit checking her phone. Ben watched his wife's performance with clinical detachment, noting how she positioned herself for maximum sympathy while investing minimal actual effort. She played the role of concerned mother just well enough to maintain appearances, but Ben could see through the facade. Now, every gesture felt calculated, every expression of concern hollow. "The important thing is that he's getting better," Tori said brightly as they prepared to take Tommy home. "Children are so resilient, aren't they?" Ben simply nodded, helping Tommy into his wheelchair for the discharge process. His son was weak but recovering well, the antibiotics having successfully fought off the infection. The doctors had confirmed what Ben already knew. Early intervention had saved Tommy's life. A few more hours of delay could have resulted in permanent brain damage or death. At home, Ben arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez to stay full-time for Tommy's recovery, officially to help with care, but actually to serve as a witness to Tori's continued absences. He also installed a sophisticated security system under the guise of protecting Tommy during his vulnerable state, but the cameras would serve a different purpose entirely. Lisa Garrett's expanded investigation had yielded fascinating results. Ryan Hutchfield, despite his successful practice and inherited wealth, had some interesting financial patterns. His lifestyle exceeded even his considerable income, funded by a series of increasingly risky investments and loans. More intriguingly, he had a history of targeting wealthy married women, often receiving gifts from them in the form of expensive jewelry, cars, and even real estate investments. He's essentially a high-end companion with a medical degree, Lisa explained during their meeting at Ben's office after hours. He uses his professional status to access wealthy social circles, then cultivates relationships with married women who have access to substantial assets. Ben studied the financial records spread across his desk. How many others? At least 6 that I can document. The pattern is always the same. Charm offensive, luxury experiences, then gradually increasing financial entanglements. The women usually leave their husbands and transfer significant assets to Ryan, either directly or through joint investments. And after the divorces? Ben asked. Lisa's smile was grim. Ryan gets bored remarkably quickly once the challenge is gone. The average relationship lasts about 8 months post-divorce. Ben absorbed this information while reviewing photographs from Ryan's social media accounts. The man documented his lifestyle obsessively. Expensive dinners, luxury vacations, designer clothing, high-end cars. In many photos, Ben could see jewelry and accessories that he now recognized as items Tori had claimed to purchase for herself. There's something else, Lisa continued. I've been monitoring their communications. They're planning something for this Sunday. She handed Ben a printed transcript of text messages between Tori and Ryan, obtained through methods Ben didn't want to know about. The conversation revealed plans for Tori to attend Sunday brunch at the Willowbrook Country Club with the girls, but the real plan involved Ryan meeting her there. They'd apparently reserved a private dining room to discuss their future together. Ben read the messages twice, his jaw tightening with each exchange. They discussed him with casual contempt, referring to him as the obstacle and joking about his devotion to his work. Ryan had written, "Once the divorce is final, we can travel anywhere. Your husband's money will last us years." Tori's response was even worse. "Tommy will adjust. Children are adaptable, and Ben's so focused on his patients, he probably won't even notice we're gone half the time." Ben set down the papers and looked out his office window at the city skyline, lights twinkling in the distance like stars. Somewhere out there, his wife was probably with her companion right now, planning a future that involved discarding him and relegating Tommy to convenient weekend visits. "When do you want the papers served?" Lisa asked. Ben checked his calendar. Sunday brunch at the country club would be perfect. Maximum witnesses, maximum humiliation. Tori valued her social standing above almost everything else. Having her serve divorce papers in front of her entire social circle would be devastating. Sunday at 11 a.m. in the country club's main dining room, and the custody filing. Ben had spent considerable time crafting this strategy with his attorney, David Ross, one of the state's most ruthless family law specialists. The custody petition wouldn't just seek primary custody. It would seek sole custody based on documented abandonment and neglect. The medical records from Tommy's hospitalization, combined with witness testimony about Tori's absence during the medical emergency, would paint a damning picture of parental abandonment. File for sole custody. Include the medical records, the timeline of her absences during Tommy's illness, and Mrs. Rodriguez's statement about Tori's negligence. Lisa nodded, making notes. Ross says you have a strong case. Abandoning a child during a medical emergency while engaging in an extramarital affair doesn't play well with family court judges. Ben stood and walked to his window, watching the late evening traffic flow through the city streets below. Each car contained people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, loving their families. Most of them would never experience the kind of betrayal that had shattered his world. But Ben was learning that betrayal, properly handled, could be transformed into something else entirely. The rage he'd felt initially had crystallized into something colder and more focused, a determination to ensure that actions had consequences, and that people who abandoned their responsibilities faced appropriate penalties. "There's one more thing I want you to do," Ben said without turning around. "I want comprehensive surveillance of Ryan's apartment this weekend. If they're planning their future together, I want to know exactly what that future looks like." As Lisa gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Ben remained at the window, already planning his next moves. The serving of papers would be just the beginning. Tori and Ryan had made the mistake of underestimating him, of viewing him as a predictable obstacle to be circumvented rather than an adversary to be respected. They were about to learn the difference. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made the Willowbrook Country Club's terrace dining room particularly popular. Ben knew this because he'd spent years attending charity events there with Tori, watching her work the room with practiced charm while he made polite conversation with other husbands who shared his outsider status in this world of inherited privilege. Tommy was feeling much better, though still weak enough to require careful monitoring. Ben had arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez to stay with him, officially for care, but actually to ensure someone trustworthy was with his son during what was about to unfold. "Can we go to the park later, Daddy?" Tommy asked over breakfast, his appetite finally returning to normal. "Maybe tomorrow, buddy. Daddy has some important business to take care of today." Tori breezed into the kitchen at 10:30, dressed in a cream-colored designer dress that Ben now realized had probably been purchased with Ryan's tastes in mind. Her hair was styled in loose waves, and she wore the diamond earrings he'd given her for their 10th anniversary, ironic jewelry for such a betrayal. "I'm heading to brunch with the girls," she announced, kissing Tommy's forehead and Ben's cheek with practiced efficiency. "We're planning the Christmas charity auction, so I might be late." "Take your time," Ben said mildly. "I'll be here with Tommy." He watched through the kitchen window as Tori drove away in her white BMW, heading toward a collision she couldn't imagine. Lisa's surveillance team was already in position at the country club, and the process server was waiting for the signal. At 11:15, Ben's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Package delivered." Ben found himself curious about the exact moment of impact, so he'd asked Lisa to provide a detailed account. The report came through an hour later, and Ben read it while sitting in his study, Tommy napping safely upstairs under Mrs. Rodriguez's watchful eye. Tori had arrived at the country club at 10:45, immediately heading to the private dining room where Ryan was waiting with champagne and strawberries. According to the surveillance team, they'd embraced passionately before settling into intimate conversation, their body language suggesting people making serious plans together. At exactly 11, a professional process server named Michael Torres had approached their table. He was a former Marine who specialized in high-stakes service situations and had no patience for drama or delays. "Victoria Hartwell?" Tori had looked up from her champagne flute, probably assuming he was club staff. "Yes?" "You've been served." Torres placed the legal documents beside her plate with military precision. "Divorce and custody papers. Have a good day." The surveillance team, positioned strategically throughout the dining room, had documented Tori's reaction in detail. According to their report, she'd gone completely white, staring at the papers as if they might disappear. Ryan had immediately grabbed the documents, scanning them quickly before his face took on what Lisa described as the expression of a man realizing he'd miscalculated badly. But the real drama had unfolded as other diners began to notice the commotion. The country club's Sunday brunch was a social event where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and within minutes half the room was buzzing with speculation about what had just happened to Tori Hartwell. According to witness accounts that would later prove useful in court, Tori had stood abruptly, knocking over her champagne glass, and began shouting that this was a mistake and harassment. Ryan had tried to calm her down, but his efforts only drew more attention to their table and their obvious intimate relationship. The scene had culminated with Tori storming out of the dining room while Ryan followed, both of them running a gauntlet of raised eyebrows and knowing looks from the cream of Willowbrook society. By the time they reached the parking lot, Tori was crying hysterically while Ryan appeared to be having a very serious conversation about damage control. Ben closed the surveillance report and walked upstairs to check on Tommy, who was coloring in a dinosaur book while Mrs. Rodriguez read nearby. His son looked up with bright eyes, his fever completely gone. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "Much better, Daddy. When is Mommy coming home?" Ben sat on the edge of Tommy's bed, choosing his words carefully. "Mommy might be staying somewhere else for a while, but you and I are going to be just fine." Tommy accepted this with the resilience of childhood, returning to his coloring. Ben kissed his son's forehead and went back downstairs, where his phone was already ringing. "Ben," Tori's voice was shrill with panic. "What the heck is this about? You can't just serve me divorce papers at brunch. This is humiliating." "Actually, I can," Ben replied calmly. "And I did. This is about Tommy being sick, isn't it? You're being completely unreasonable. Children get fevers all the time. This is about you abandoning our son during a medical emergency to continue your relationship with Ryan Hutchfield." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Tori spoke again, her voice had changed, the panic replaced by calculation. "I don't know what you think you know, but—" "I know everything, Tori. The hotels, the restaurants, the trips. I know about Ryan's financial situation and his history with married women. I know about your plans to travel together after our divorce." Another pause. Then, "Ben, we can work this out. We can go to counseling." "No!" Ben interrupted, his voice carrying a finality that surprised even him. "We can't. The only thing we're going to work out is custody arrangements and asset division." "You can't take Tommy away from me." "I'm not taking him away. You already abandoned him. I'm just making it official." He hung up and immediately called David Ross, his attorney. "How did it go?" David asked. "Exactly as planned. She's panicking, which means she'll make mistakes." "How long before the custody hearing?" "Emergency hearing is scheduled for Thursday. With the medical records and witness testimony, we should get temporary sole custody pending full proceedings." Ben walked to his study window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn that represented everything he'd built for his family. Soon it would be just him and Tommy, which felt more like a beginning than an ending. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You don't know who you're messing with." Ben smiled grimly and forwarded the message to Lisa with a note. "Looks like Ryan wants to play. Let's see what other interesting information we can find about Dr. Hutchfield's business practices." The first phase of his plan was complete. Tori and Ryan had been exposed and humiliated. The legal machinery was in motion, and Tommy was safe. But Ben was just getting started. After all, abandoning a child during a medical emergency while laughing about it deserved consequences that extended far beyond divorce papers. 3 days after the country club humiliation, Ben received an interesting phone call at his office. Dr. Ryan Hutchfield wanted to meet, ostensibly to discuss the situation like civilized men. Ben agreed, curious to see what kind of man would target another man's wife and family with such calculated precision. They met at a coffee shop in neutral territory, away from both the hospital and Ryan's clinic. Ben arrived first, choosing a corner table where he could observe Ryan's entrance and body language. When Ryan walked in, Ben was struck by how ordinary he looked without the surgical scrubs or expensive clothes. Just another man in his late 30s trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Dr. Hartwell," Ryan said, extending his hand with forced professionalism. "Thank you for meeting with me." Ben shook the offered hand, noting that Ryan's grip was firm but his palm was slightly damp, a subtle sign of nervousness. "Dr. Hutchfield, what did you want to discuss?" Ryan sat down and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about unfortunate misunderstandings and complicated situations. He painted himself as a man who had simply fallen in love, emphasizing his genuine feelings for Tori while carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of the damage he'd helped cause. "I understand you're upset," Ryan said, his tone suggesting he viewed Ben as an unreasonable obstacle rather than a wronged husband. "But Tori and I didn't plan for this to happen. Sometimes people just connect." Ben listened without expression, cataloging every word and gesture. Ryan was performing, trying to establish himself as the reasonable party, while positioning Ben as an overly emotional husband who couldn't accept that his marriage was over. "What exactly are you proposing?" Ben asked. "A civilized divorce. Tori gets reasonable custody of Tommy. You get a fair division of assets and we all move forward with our lives. No need for public drama or ugly court battles." Ben almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. Ryan was essentially asking Ben to facilitate his own destruction while making it as convenient as possible for the people who had betrayed him. And if I don't agree to your definition of reasonable? Ben asked. Ryan's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. Look, I understand you're angry, but you should know that Tori and I are serious about our future together. Fighting this will only hurt Tommy in the long run. You're threatening me. I'm explaining reality. Ryan leaned forward, his voice dropping. I have resources, connections, and influence in this city. Tori comes from one of the most prominent families in the state. If you try to make this difficult, you'll find yourself fighting battles you can't win. Ben studied Ryan's face, noting the way his eyes had hardened and his posture had shifted from supplicant to predator. This was the real Ryan Hutchfield, not the charming doctor or devoted companion, but a man who viewed other people as obstacles to be overcome or assets to be acquired. Interesting, Ben said mildly. And how exactly would you make things difficult for me? Ryan smiled, the expression cold and calculating. Hospital board members talk to each other. Wealthy patients have choices about which surgeon to trust with their children. Medical licenses require peer review for renewal. There are many ways a physician's career can be impacted by questions about their personal judgment and stability. The threat was clear. Cooperate or face professional sabotage. Ryan was essentially promising to destroy Ben's career if he didn't agree to terms that would allow the affair to transition smoothly into a new marriage. Ben nodded slowly, as if considering this information seriously. I see, and you believe you have the influence to make this happen. I know I do. Ben pulled out his phone and opened the voice recording app he'd started when Ryan sat down. Could you repeat that last part about using your influence to damage my medical career if I don't cooperate with your demands? Ryan's face went pale as he realized what had just happened. You were recording me? Public place. No expectation of privacy. Perfectly legal. Ben stopped the recording and saved it. You just threatened to use professional sabotage as leverage in a custody dispute. That's extortion, Dr. Hutchfield. Ryan started to speak, but Ben held up a hand. Here's what's actually going to happen, Ben continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. You're going to stay away from my wife and my son. You're going to end your relationship with Tori immediately, and you're going to pray that the state medical board doesn't receive an anonymous complaint about a plastic surgeon who uses professional threats to manipulate custody cases. You can't prove anything. Ben smiled for the first time during their conversation. I don't need to prove anything to file a complaint. I just need reasonable suspicion of unethical behavior. The investigation that follows will be thorough. He leaned back in his chair, watching Ryan process this new reality. You see, Doctor, you made two critical errors. First, you assumed I was just another wronged husband who would roll over to avoid embarrassment. Second, you threatened my ability to save children's lives. Ben's voice took on an edge that made Ryan involuntarily lean back. I've dedicated my entire adult life to pediatric surgery. I've saved hundreds of children, including premature babies that other doctors gave up on. My reputation isn't just professional, it's built on a foundation of saved lives. He stood, preparing to leave. If you try to damage that reputation, if you interfere with my ability to help sick children, I will destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never heard the name Hartwell. Ryan found his voice as Ben walked away. This isn't over. Ben turned back, his expression deadly calm. No, it's not, but it's going to end very badly for you if you don't make better choices going forward. As Ben left the coffee shop, he felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Ryan had revealed himself to be exactly what Ben had suspected. A predator who used charm and threats in equal measure to get what he wanted. But Ryan had also made a critical tactical error. He'd threatened Ben's medical career, which meant he'd crossed a line from personal betrayal into professional warfare, and in that arena, Ben had advantages that Ryan couldn't imagine. Within an hour, Ben had forwarded the recording to David Ross with instructions to prepare formal complaints to both the State Medical Board and the Hospital Ethics Committee. He also sent a copy to Lisa Garrett with a simple message. Time to accelerate Phase 2. If Ryan wanted to play with threats and intimidation, Ben was prepared to show him how the game was really played. Dr. Marcus Webb, Chief of Staff at Metropolitan General Hospital, sat across from Ben in his spacious office. The recording of Ryan's threats played through his desktop speakers for the second time. Webb was a man Ben respected, a surgeon who had built his career on merit and maintained the hospital's reputation through careful attention to ethical standards. "This is highly concerning," Webb said after the recording ended. "Dr. Hutchfield is suggesting he can influence medical board decisions and peer reviews. That implies either corruption or delusional overconfidence." Ben had carefully chosen to approach Webb first, knowing that any formal complaint would carry more weight coming from the Chief of Staff than from someone who might be seen as seeking revenge. Webb's reputation for integrity was unassailable, and his endorsement would lend credibility to any investigation. "I'm particularly troubled by the threat to interfere with patient care," Ben said. "If he's willing to suggest that wealthy patients might avoid a surgeon based on personal grudges, it raises questions about his own decision-making process." Webb nodded grimly. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the medical board this afternoon. This type of behavior is exactly what professional oversight is designed to address." Meanwhile, Lisa Garrett's expanded investigation into Ryan's background had yielded disturbing results. The deeper she dug, the more evidence she found of a pattern that went far beyond simple infidelity. "You need to see this," Lisa said, spreading documents across Ben's kitchen table after Tommy had gone to bed. "Ryan's not just targeting wealthy married women. He's systematically defrauding them." The financial records painted a picture of sophisticated manipulation. Ryan would begin relationships with married women from wealthy families, gradually gaining their trust and eventually convincing them to make joint investments in his various business ventures. These investments were always structured to give Ryan effective control while putting the women's assets at risk. "Look at this." Lisa pointed to a series of bank transfers. Patricia Mayfield divorced from her husband last year after a 2-year affair with Ryan. She invested $800,000 in his medical spa venture. 6 months after the divorce was final, the business declared bankruptcy and she lost everything. Similar patterns emerged with other women. Jennifer Walsh had lost $1.2 million in a real estate development scheme. Sandra Chun had invested her entire inheritance in Ryan's attempt to franchise his plastic surgery practice. All had ended up financially devastated while Ryan somehow emerged unscathed. "He's using shell companies and offshore accounts to hide assets," Lisa explained. "The women think they're investing in legitimate businesses with their partner, but they're actually funding his lifestyle while assuming all the legal liability." Ben studied the documents with growing understanding. "Tori doesn't know, does she?" "Based on their communications, no. He's already talking to her about investment opportunities, but hasn't made his move yet. I think he was waiting for the divorce to be final before introducing the financial component." Ben felt a cold rage settle in his chest. Ryan wasn't just destroying Ben's marriage. He was planning to systematically rob Tori of her inheritance and assets. The man was a predator who had refined his technique over years of practice. "There's more," Lisa continued. "I've been tracking his communications with other potential targets. He's already cultivating relationships with at least 3 other wealthy married women. This isn't love, it's his business model." Ben absorbed this information while planning his next moves. The medical board complaint would damage Ryan's professional reputation, but it wouldn't stop his financial predation. For that, Ben needed a different approach. "I want you to contact the other women, the ones he's already defrauded. If they're willing to cooperate, we might be able to build a federal case for wire fraud and racketeering. That could take months or years to develop. Then we need a more immediate solution." Ben stood and walked to his window, looking out at the neighborhood where he'd thought he was building a safe life for his family. What would happen if his current targets knew what he really was? Lisa smiled. "That's an interesting question." Jennifer Walsh was particularly bitter about her experience. She might be willing to share her story with the right audience. Ben turned back to face her. "Set up meetings with his previous victims. I want to know everything, how he operated, what warning signs they missed, what evidence they still have." Over the next 2 days, Ben met with 3 of Ryan's former targets. Their stories were remarkably similar. A charming doctor sweeps them off their feet, gradually introduces business opportunities, convinces them to leave their husbands, then systematically drains their assets before disappearing. Patricia Mayfield was particularly compelling. A former attorney who had given up her practice during her marriage, she lost not just her money but her entire social circle when Ryan abandoned her. She still had copies of all their financial documents and communications. "I should have seen it coming," she said during their coffee meeting. "But he was so convincing, so professional. I trusted him with everything." "Would you be willing to warn his current targets?" Ben asked. Patricia's smile was sharp with vindication. "With pleasure." Ben's phone rang as he drove home from the meeting. The caller ID showed Webb's office. "Ben, we have a problem," Webb said without preamble. The medical board moved quickly on the complaint. They started a preliminary investigation this morning, but Ryan's attorney has filed a counter-complaint. "What kind of counter-complaint?" "Professional harassment, abuse of process, and personal vendetta. He's claiming you're using your position and reputation to orchestrate a campaign of professional destruction because you can't accept that your wife chose someone else." Ben pulled over to focus on the conversation. "Do they have any evidence?" "That's just it. They do. Someone's been feeding them information about your investigation, your meetings with his former associates, even details about your surveillance activities." No. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. "Someone's watching me." "It appears so." "Ben, you need to be very careful here. If they can prove you've been conducting a personal vendetta using professional channels, it could backfire spectacularly." After hanging up, Ben sat in his car for several minutes, processing this new development. Ryan was more sophisticated than he'd initially appeared, with resources and connections that allowed him to monitor Ben's activities and mount an effective counterattack. But Ben had spent years performing complex surgeries where the margin for error was measured in millimeters and seconds. He understood that the most dangerous moments in any operation were often the ones where everything seemed to be going wrong simultaneously. Those were the moments that separated competent surgeons from great ones. Ben started his car and headed home, already planning his next move. If Ryan wanted to escalate this conflict, Ben was prepared to show him what real escalation looked like. After all, Ryan had made the mistake of threatening not just Ben's family, but his ability to save children's lives. That was a line Ben would never allow anyone to cross without consequences. The emergency custody hearing arrived on a Thursday morning that felt more like a trial than a family court proceeding. Ben sat beside David Ross, watching Tori enter the courtroom with her own attorney, a high-powered family law specialist named Catherine Wild, who normally charged $800 an hour and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Tori looked polished and composed, wearing a conservative navy dress and minimal jewelry. She'd clearly been coached on how to present herself as a devoted mother who was being unfairly attacked by a vindictive husband. Ryan wasn't present, having been advised that his appearance would only complicate matters. Judge Helen Morrison was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law and her particular sensitivity to cases involving child welfare. She reviewed the preliminary documents with careful attention before calling the proceeding to order. "This is an emergency hearing for temporary custody pending full divorce proceedings," Judge Morrison began. "Dr. Hartwell is seeking sole custody based on allegations of child abandonment and neglect. Mrs. Hartwell is requesting joint custody with standard visitation arrangements." David Ross presented Ben's case methodically, starting with the medical records from Tommy's hospitalization. The documentation was damning. A 7-year-old boy with bacterial meningitis, whose mother had refused to come to the hospital because she was at a party. "Your Honor," David said, "the medical records show that Tommy Hartwell was admitted with a life-threatening condition that required immediate treatment. Dr. Hartwell attempted to contact his wife multiple times, but she refused to leave her social engagement." He played the recording Ben had made of their phone conversation, Tori's voice echoing through the courtroom. "He's manipulating us for attention. Let him sweat it out." Judge Morrison's expression darkened as she listened to a mother dismissing her child's medical emergency. When the recording ended, She turned to Catherine Wilde. "Counselor, how does your client respond to this evidence?" Catherine stood with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell was attending a charity function for the Children's Hospital Foundation. Ironically, an event dedicated to helping sick children. She had no way of knowing the severity of Tommy's condition, and Dr. Hartwell has a documented history of being overly anxious about minor illnesses." It was a reasonable defense, but David was ready with his counterattack. He presented testimony from Mrs. Rodriguez detailing Tori's frequent absences and lack of involvement in Tommy's daily care. He showed evidence of the affair, including hotel receipts and restaurant charges that coincided with times when Tommy was ill or needed parental attention. The most damaging evidence came from the private investigator's surveillance footage. Video showed Tori leaving the country club Sunday brunch in tears after being served, but also captured her returning to Ryan's apartment that same evening, apparently having recovered from her distress remarkably quickly. "Your Honor," David continued, "this footage was taken 3 days after Mrs. Hartwell's son was hospitalized with a life-threatening illness. Rather than focusing on his recovery, she was continuing her extramarital relationship." Judge Morrison studied the evidence carefully before turning to Tori. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm going to ask you directly. When your son was hospitalized with bacterial meningitis, why did you choose not to go to the hospital?" Tori stood, her composure beginning to crack under the judge's direct stare. "Your Honor, I was told it was just a fever. My husband tends to be dramatic about medical issues. I thought he was overreacting." "Your husband is a pediatric surgeon, Mrs. Hartwell. When a pediatric surgeon tells you that your child has a 104-degree fever and needs emergency care, do you typically dismiss that as overreacting?" No, Your Honor. I made an error in judgment." Judge Morrison's next question cut to the heart of the matter. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you currently in a romantic relationship with Dr. Ryan Hutchfield?" Catherine Wilde started to object, but Tori answered before her attorney could intervene. "Yes, Your Honor." "And how long has this relationship been ongoing?" Tori glanced at her attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "Approximately 14 months. So you began this relationship while married to Dr. Hartwell and while Tommy was 6 years old?"
"Yes, Your Honor."
Judge Morrison made notes before addressing both attorneys. "I'm going to recess for 30 minutes to review the evidence. When we return, I'll render my decision on temporary custody." During the recess, Ben watched Tori confer intensely with her attorney. He could see the panic in her eyes as she finally understood that her actions had consequences beyond social embarrassment. When court reconvened, Judge Morrison's decision was swift and unambiguous. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mrs. Hartwell abandoned her parental responsibilities during a medical emergency, prioritizing her personal relationship over her child's welfare. The medical records clearly show that Tommy Hartwell's condition was life-threatening and required immediate parental attention." She paused, looking directly at Tori. The fact that Mrs. Hartwell dismissed her child's medical emergency as manipulation while continuing to attend a social function demonstrates a fundamental failure of parental judgment. The judge's voice took on a harder edge. "Furthermore, the evidence shows a pattern of neglect in prioritizing the extramarital relationship over parental responsibilities. In 14 months of infidelity, Mrs. Hartwell apparently never considered the impact on her 7-year-old son." Judge Morrison's final ruling was devastating for Tori. Temporary sole custody is awarded to Dr. Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell will have supervised visitation rights 2 afternoons per week, pending psychological evaluation and completion of parenting classes. As the gavel fell, Ben felt a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. Tommy would be safe, protected from a mother who had proven willing to abandon him when her personal desires conflicted with her parental duties. Tori burst into tears as the reality hit her. She had lost her son because she had chosen her companion over her child during a medical emergency. Catherine Wilde immediately announced their intention to appeal, but everyone in the courtroom knew that the evidence was too damning to overcome. As they left the courthouse, David Ross pulled Ben aside. "The full divorce proceedings will take several months, but with this custody ruling, you're in a very strong position. Tori is going to have to accept whatever settlement terms we offer." Ben nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond the legal victory. The custody battle was won, but Ryan Hutchfield was still out there, still targeting other women, and still using his medical credentials to facilitate financial fraud. That evening, Ben sat in Tommy's room as his son prepared for bed, reading from a book about dinosaurs. Tommy seemed happier and more relaxed than he'd been in months, apparently sensing that his world had become more stable. "Daddy, are you and Mommy getting divorced?" Tommy asked with the directness that only children possess. "Yes, buddy, we are." "Will I still see Mommy?" "Sometimes, but you're going to live with me." Tommy considered this seriously. "Okay, will you still save other kids at the hospital?" "Always," Ben promised, kissing his son's forehead. "I'll always be there to help sick children get better." As Tommy drifted off to sleep, Ben sat in the darkened room planning his next moves. The custody battle was over, but Ben's war with Ryan Hutchfield was just beginning. After all, abandoning a child during a medical emergency, while laughing about it, deserved consequences that extended far beyond losing custody. Ryan had threatened to destroy Ben's ability to save children's lives. Now, Ben was going to show him what happened when someone made that kind of threat against a man who had nothing left to lose except his son, and everything necessary to protect him. 6 months after the custody hearing, Ben stood in the observation deck overlooking Operating Room 3, watching Dr. Ryan Hutchfield perform what would be his final surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital. The irony wasn't lost on Ben that Ryan was performing a rhinoplasty, cosmetic surgery, while Ben had just finished a 6-hour operation to remove a brain tumor from a 9-year-old girl. The state medical board's investigation had concluded 3 weeks earlier with a devastating report. Ryan's professional conduct was found to be grossly unethical, and his medical license was suspended pending a full disciplinary hearing. The evidence had been overwhelming: recorded threats against a colleague, documented financial fraud against patients, and a pattern of professional misconduct spanning several years. But the medical board's action was only the beginning of Ryan's problems. Lisa Garrett's investigation had evolved into something far more comprehensive than either she or Ben had originally envisioned. Working with Patricia Mayfield and 2 other victims, they had assembled a federal case that painted Ryan as the center of a sophisticated fraud operation targeting wealthy women throughout the region. The FBI had raided Ryan's offices and frozen his assets 3 days ago. The charges included wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act. If convicted on all counts, Ryan faced up to 30 years in federal prison. Ben watched through the glass as Ryan struggled to maintain his composure while performing surgery under the watchful eyes of hospital administrators. Word of the federal charges had spread quickly through the medical community, and Ryan's reputation was in ruins. His wealthy patients had abandoned him, his colleagues avoided him, and his practice was collapsing. "Impressive work," a voice said behind Ben. He turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb approaching with 2 cups of coffee. The chief of staff handed one to Ben and joined him at the observation window. "The board's investigation," Webb said, shaking his head. "All of it. The way you documented everything, built your case methodically, never let emotion compromise your judgment. It was like watching a master surgeon approach a complex operation." Ben sipped his coffee, watching Ryan's hands shake slightly as he worked. "He made it easy by being exactly what I thought he was." "Tori isn't doing well," Webb said. I hear it was true. Tori had been devastated by the cascade of revelations about Ryan's true nature. When the federal charges were announced, she had finally understood that she'd been targeted as his next victim rather than his true love. The psychological evaluation ordered by the family court had found her severely depressed and struggling with the reality of her choices. "She's in therapy," Ben said simply. "Tommy sees her twice a week under supervision. She's trying to rebuild their relationship." "And you?" Ben considered the question carefully. "I'm exactly where I should be. Tommy's healthy and happy. My practice is thriving. I'm saving children's lives every day." What he didn't tell Webb was that he'd found a sense of satisfaction in the systematic destruction of Ryan's life that surprised him with its intensity. The man who had threatened Ben's ability to help sick children was now facing decades in prison. His medical career over, his reputation destroyed. Ben's phone buzzed with a text from David Ross. Divorce finalized. Settlement approved by court. Congratulations. The final divorce decree had been remarkably favorable to Ben. With Tori's credibility destroyed by the custody hearings and her association with a federal criminal, she'd had little choice but to accept terms that gave Ben the house, primary custody of Tommy, and minimal alimony obligations. Her trust fund would provide for her basic needs, but the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to was over. "I should get back," Ben said, finishing his coffee. "I have a consultation with the parents of a 3-year-old who needs heart surgery." Webb nodded. "Ben, what you've been through would have broken a lot of men. The fact that you never let it compromise your work, never let it affect your patients, that's what makes you an exceptional surgeon." As Ben walked back toward the pediatric wing, he passed the hospital's wall of honor, photographs of doctors who had made significant contributions to child welfare. His own photo had been added just last month, recognizing his role in establishing a new program for emergency pediatric surgery. Ben paused at Tommy's school on his way home, arriving just as dismissal began. He watched his son emerge from the building with his backpack and lunchbox, scanning the crowd of parents until he spotted Ben. Tommy's face lit up with genuine joy as he ran toward his father. "Daddy, guess what? I got an A on my science project." Ben lifted Tommy into a hug, feeling the solid weight of his son in his arms. "That's wonderful, buddy. What was your project about?" "How doctors save people. I told everyone about what you do." As they walked to the car together, Tommy chattering excitedly about his school day, Ben reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed his family had ultimately made them stronger. Tommy was thriving with the stability and attention he deserved, and Ben had learned that he was capable of protecting what mattered most to him, with a ruthlessness that surprised even himself. At last, father and son drove home, bathed in the golden light of a new beginning. His phone rang as they drove home. The caller ID showed the hospital's number. Dr. Hartwell speaking. "Doctor, we have an emergency. A 5-year-old came in with internal injuries from a fall. The family specifically requested you." Ben glanced at Tommy in the rearview mirror, then made a decision that would have been impossible during his marriage. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, and prepare a pediatric ICU room. I have a feeling we're going to need it." He called Mrs. Rodriguez to meet them at the hospital, where she would watch Tommy in the family waiting area while Ben saved another child's life. It was a perfect arrangement. Tommy would be safe and cared for while Ben did what he did best. As they pulled into the hospital parking garage, Ben realized that he'd found something better than the life he'd lost. He had his son, his calling, and the absolute certainty that he would never again allow anyone to threaten either. Ryan Hutchfield was facing federal prison, his medical career destroyed and his reputation in ruins. Tori was alone, struggling with the consequences of choices that had cost her everything that mattered. Both had learned that betraying Dr. Benjamin Hartwell came with prices they couldn't afford to pay. Ben Hartwell had become exactly what the situation required, a man who protected what mattered most to him with surgical precision and absolutely no mercy for those who threatened his family, and that man was just getting started.